Okay, let's go ahead and continue on with lots of reminders as we come up to the end. Now, a couple of things. So, first of all, for your final, you are going to submit a resume. And I think that the temptation might be, well, I already have a resume. I did it early in the quarter. I got some feedback on it, and it's pretty polished now. Remember that our resume should be tailored to the job that we're applying for. So even if you have a resume from earlier in the quarter or from somewhere else that you've worked on or been working on, remember that the goal is to tailor it. So it will likely look different depending on the situation, at least some minor adjustments. So, resume reminders number one, your resume is the distillation of your education and experience. It is a way for that hiring manager or whoever it is to very quickly look and see if you have the qualifications that are necessary for that job. So it is your education and your experience. Make sure you're avoiding any unnecessary graphics or visual distractions. That if you're using colors, they are those nice neutral colors. So, neon pink, great color. I would probably avoid it for these. And again, sort of pro tip we talked about earlier in the quarter, if you're using color, font, format, for your resume, go ahead and mirror it or use the same thing on your cover letter so that those two look like they belong together. When it comes to listing your experience, make sure that you're listing your most recent experience first and then move backwards in chronological order. So, if you've been working for 10 years, you would start with the most recent job. Maybe you've had it for the last 2 years, and then you're going to slowly move backwards. Um, Use short bulleted lists that focus on accomplishments. So we talked about this a lot when we were talking about resumes. Make sure that as you have your job description, that when you think about what you accomplished at that job, it is quantifiable, right? Numbers are good, percentages are good. That is far better than just saying what your tasks were, what you were expected to do. Number five, include your contact information. So make sure, again, I talked about this with emails, make sure your contact info is there. On a resume, it's at the top. Avoid the gamer tag and all that stuff as your email address. We talked about number six. I can count six a little bit. Include your references if asked. It is perfectly fine in most scenarios to say references available upon request. Now, that said, I would keep those references ready to go so that if they ask, you've got them there. Best case scenario, you've got a name, position, job, right? So who is that person? Where do they work? What's their job title? And then their contact, so their email and their phone number. And we didn't really talk about this before, but I'll talk about it now. When you include a reference, make sure that person is okay with being a reference and that they know that they might be contacted. So, a couple quick anecdotes. I always tell students if they need a reference in the future, they're welcome to contact me and reach out. Now, most of the time, the students that ask if I would be willing to be a reference for a job or internship or even transfer or something like that to another institution, most of them are fantastic students. I remember them well. They did well in the class. On occasion, maybe 10% of the time, I'll have a student who was not a great student, maybe a C student, ask if I would be a reference. Now, my usual comment is I will be a reference for you, but I can only speak to what you did in the class, and I'm not going to make things up. A good reference will simply answer the questions. Depending on the job, there might be restrictions. I know when I was working as a bartender way in the past and hiring people, there were certain things we couldn't ask. Most commonly, what we could ask were things like, would you hire the person again? Or how would you rate their job performance? Now, in a slightly different scenario, about 4 years ago, I was a reference for a colleague of mine who was going to transition into working for law enforcement. And so I had a long conversation on the phone with this police officer who was hiring officer, or whatever they call them in the police force. Um, and there were a lot of questions in there that probably are more detailed, but my colleague had asked me ahead of time. So I knew that I might be asked some questions that would be maybe out of the normal. So there you go. References. Number 6. Okay, so number 7, include clear dates of employment. Remember, that could be month and year, maybe day, month, and year if you've got that information. If it's a job that you still have, it would be the month and year that you started through present. And that just helps your employer know how long you were at a job. Remember, it's not always a great sign if you worked at one job for 3 months, one job for 5 months, another job for 4 months. That indicates that there's a lot of sort of movement in your life and that they may be reluctant. I'm not saying that it's a good thing that they're reluctant. There are some perfectly qualified people who, for many reasons, might have had to move around. I'm thinking of, say, the spouse of somebody in the military, and perhaps that person, their military spouse had a change of station rather rapidly, several times. There's nothing that can be done about that, but that can be explained in the cover letter. And then lastly, and not by any terms least, make sure that you have a clear objectives or summary statement at the top of your resume. And this is the thing that's really going to kind of tip the scales in your favor. We talked about this when we talked about resumes, but use an objectives statement if you are not as familiar with an industry, if you don't have a whole lot of experience, you're just trying to get your foot in the door, and use a summary statement if you have a lot of experience so that you can show, hey, I have 7, 8, 10, 15, 20 years in this field, and I'm just working to expand or move into a different position. Okay, so let's see. I think we can kind of continue on. Let's go into cover letters. So cover letters, again, I think the temptation here is to say, I wrote a cover letter earlier in this quarter. I'm just going to use the same cover letter. Please don't do that. Please remember that cover letters, like your resume, are tailored to the job. And it's going to be very clear to somebody if it is just a copy and paste job and you have not adjusted your cover letter. You want to make sure that the cover letter matches the specific job. Now, whether or not you have a basic resume and a basic cover letter that you use for everything and you just tailor them before you submit them, that's a different story. So make sure, again, number 1, tailor the cover letter to the job. Don't simply rehash your resume. Again, hopefully we've kind of covered this with the whole cover letter and resume sections of the course. But you want to make sure that you're focusing on key experiences and how those experiences are best suited for this specific job. Make sure, again, that you use complete sentences and appropriate tone. Make sure that you spelling check and grammar check. Again, I would highly recommend that you read your work out loud, that you have somebody else look at it. The more eyes, the better. Number 5, make sure that you've addressed the correct recipient, that you have their name spelled correctly, the correct job title, any of those things, because, again, this has happened to me before, where I get an email from somebody and they've misspelled my name, they've used the wrong name, they've used the wrong title, whatever it is, and right away I'm not predisposed to thinking favorably of this person who hasn't taken the time to spell my name correctly. Focus on your experiences and how your experiences match the specific job, whatever that is. Again, this is very similar to thinking about accomplishments rather than tasks. And then lastly, be enthusiastic. This is you introducing yourself to somebody else. So you want to show your personality a little bit. You really want to make sure that they think, yeah, I want this person to work for me. I'd really like to work with this person because they seem friendly, they seem confident, they seem competent, all of those things. So as you work on your cover letter for this final assignment, or the final sort of portfolio-ish assignment, make sure that you're not simply using exactly what we used earlier this quarter. That's not the goal here. The goal is to rework these things and demonstrate your ability to tailor your resume and your cover letter to a specific task and purpose. All right, so there you go. That's it for this part. We'll come back to further explain kind of how all these things are going to bring together, or how we're going to bring all these things together. But in the meantime, if you have questions, comments, concerns, jokes, memes, or recipes, please let me know. Otherwise, I'll talk to you all in the future.